I'll talk a little bit about high level as to what's part of the resource management process as we define it. We see it starting really with kind of the sales pipeline. What are the sales opportunities and how do these relate to resources? The resource management function itself is concerned with scheduling and deployment of the actual resources to fulfill that sales pipeline. Then we have departmental functional alignment, and that has to do with the integration between sales and delivery and HR. What are we selling? What are the resources to do that? Who should we hire and how best to onboard them? And so that relates to a lot of core HR processes that I mentioned, so onboarding, recruitment, visibility in the pipeline, so we're recruiting against future opportunities. And then finally, the actual resources themselves, who is available to support the various projects that get started. Okay, so this is a summary from one of the surveys that I mentioned as to what are the leading practices of firms in the resource management area. And so at the top of the list is a very strong focus around pipeline management. So not just raw pipeline, but weighted average pipeline. So you know what opportunities are prevalent, what is the probability of them closing, and some assessment of how those relate to the resource skills forecast. I'd also put into this category the notion of having an accurate backlog and managing your backlog well. The next practice relates to subcontractor employee profiles. So having a relatively detailed and robust profiles of your subcontractors' employees to improve the overall scheduling function. So you know who actually has relevant skills for a given job and their most current availability. This is centralized and automated resource management is another key area, and that allows for the centralization of scheduling and the automated application of potential resources, which we'll take a look at a little later. And we're seeing a trend towards, that when you're centralized, that it takes the career management and people management focus. That's the main purpose of the managing person over a given consultant, and that the actual scheduling and resource management function is separate. So it separates those two disciplines, so they're not both the requirement of the acting manager for a given pool of resources. Virtual centers of expertise. We do this in our firm as well. We have communities of interest, and this is a way to share domain expertise and knowledge. So we do it for verticals. So we have a community of interest for retail or for financial services, and it provides a mechanism to share domain expertise. Capacity models relates to having a very detailed pipeline view that translates into very specific resource needs. So you're really forecasting by skill set. That's kind of a leading practice in resource management. Retention and rotation has to do with how you manage the people, making sure they get a fairly good lateral movement within the organization. They get a broad exposure, and this provides higher levels of motivation and resulting retention. Centralized recruiting and training is just flat out more efficient when a lot of firms look at resource management. And then having tools, technologies that help share knowledge, whether it be domain knowledge, methodology knowledge, project knowledge, is another kind of best practice in the resource management area. So if you look at some KPIs across some of these, you can see in the proposal area, key one is bid to win ratio. I think from what we've seen, if you're in the 5 to 6 range out of 10, so you're winning 5 out of 6 pursuits you actually bid on, that's pretty good. Less than that might be a bit of a problem. Pricing, revenue, and margin, it depends on what segment you're in, but north of 35% on a gross margin basis is pretty good. One of the areas where we see a lot of opportunity for improvement is actually not, being very relentless about not bidding on opportunities. So having a good opportunity review process to no bid. You see bookings and backlog forecast accuracy plus or minus 10% is pretty good. Billing and collection, it's weekly time submission and DSO less than 45 days. And then the other kind of key metric around resource management is the time it takes to staff a project and staffing forecast revisions. The fairly prevalent practice would be weekly forecast provisions. Any more than that, so if you're like monthly or something, you tend to miss a lot of opportunities. And staffing projects kind of in the 8 to 10 days time frame is pretty good. And you can see some of the tools that support that. Okay, so this is the various strategies around resource management. So you can see at the top, centrally managed tends to fit well when you have a larger organization and it's growing rapidly. The nature of the projects, they tend to be bigger, and you get very good visibility into your resource pool. I would say, the most prevalent strategies that we've seen would be local and centrally managed. The others are kind of by exception and have specific cases where they apply. Locally managed, this is very good for the, young, dynamic, relatively small organization. Tends to be more cost effective. The employees wear many hats. Horizontal skill set is good for developing expertise. So if you have a competency, whether it be technical or whether you have an industry domain, if driving resource management through that strategy tends to fit well. If you have a few very large accounts that are almost markets unto themselves, the account-based model tends to be very effective. And then the Center of Excellence model, it can be costly, but it's very good for developing expertise. Okay, so this is another excerpt out of the issues in integrating sales and delivery from the SPI report. And I'm not going to go through all the details. We're certainly going to pass some of this material along after the session, but this gives you some insight into where are the dysfunctional areas between sales and delivery. And I kind of distill it down to, when you look at the top, we're a product company, not a service company. That has a lot to do with the incentives that are in place for a services organization, especially when they're also selling products. Partners are, the primary sales channel, and in the ERP heyday when SAP and Oracle and others were in the market in the 90s, they had a very big emphasis on the partner channel, and it needs to be calibrated accordingly, because the risk here is that you have all of your relationships and all of the referenceability is with the partners if they're too heavily relied on. And at the same time, you want to build capacity. So it's kind of an overall sales approach, what makes most sense. And then, selling software versus selling services, it's a very different style typically. It's not necessarily as an aggressive style. So the top three really relate to the approach, your sales approach. The bottom two relate to your sales team. So, services are too expensive. Services are too complex. Services require more industry process knowledge. In our view, that kind of relates to having the right sales team in place. So you have representation from a salesperson, an industry expert, your delivery manager, and other subject matter experts all form the team that sells a given project as opposed to an individual. So that kind of gives you an overview of the dysfunction between sales and service. The last kind of area would relate to mechanisms to integrate sales and service. And every organization is in a different level of sophistication around go-to-market. So if you're a young professional services organization, you're not going to necessarily exhibit some of the rigor and discipline of a more mature organization. So that's why there's a continuum of basic to highly sophisticated here. But some of the mechanisms to integrate sales and delivery would include sales methodology, and that would encompass having a very common way to talk about opportunities, accounts, and projects, and the use of a standard methodology and joint account planning between sales and delivery. Having a clear target market is a mechanism to integrate sales and service. So there's often a lot of debate as to what is an ideal opportunity and what is the target market if you were to ask someone in delivery and someone in sales. So having a clear understanding of that, these group of clients for a variety of reasons represent our ideal prospects, and an ideal project looks like this, and an ideal lead has these characteristics. So, you're pursuing work that makes sense to both sales and delivery. The proposal process, having a clear understanding of who owns what part of the proposal process, and having that well understood by both sales and delivery as a mechanism to introduce or integrate the two. Often there's some kind of disconnect as to who owns what part of the sales process, and you end up missing clients' needs or having a suboptimal proposal. Pricing and scoping is a good mechanism. Who has the authority to approve what pricing at what level, and having a clear understanding of that as well as actual costs. And then finally, forecasting and scheduling and project management. Forecasting has to do with translating the high probability opportunities into very specific skill sets required to the project. And then project management has to do with keeping a up-to-date status and communicating it well across the organization, especially around things like change orders, project issues, client satisfaction issues. So those are kind of some of the mechanisms to integrate sales and service. I'm going to now turn it over to James, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the scenarios that we spoke of earlier.